So this is the Pixlr.com demo from the CBU Photojournalism 210 class on January 16th, 2014. Hopefully we'll send that back. The other thing you can do if you want a bigger screen, you can usually go to your browser to some sort of presentation mode, which now this looks just like Photoshop for the most part, right? So like we said, the image looks a little bit dark. And just to make sure your eyes aren't tricking yourself, make sure that your brightness is all the way up on your screen. And just do me a favor and tilt your screen all the way back and then look forward and just notice how it changes. So just know that like the screen and the angle, it can really make a huge difference. And so if things aren't looking right, like that could be an issue. Okay, so here's our image. If you looked in the book, kind of the first thing it kind of talked about was auto level. So would you guys click on that and see what happens? Boom, instantly looks quite a bit better. However, you don't have any control over this. This isn't a bad place to start, or at least to get an idea of what does this image look like. And sometimes it's a good place to start, gives you a better starting ground, and then you can enhance it better. The problem is, though, is now we have a really bright spot down here. The other problem is now I've changed the image. Well, what if I want to go back? Well, I can go back over here in my history, okay, to the original. And let me actually show you something else too with layers. One of the things that we're going to want to do is actually duplicate the layer. In Photoshop, you can just drag this onto here. And this one, it doesn't work, so I'm going to do Command A. Notice I get these things. They're called marching ants. So I do Command A to select all. Command C to copy. Now I'm going to click over here in this other layer, and if it works like Photoshop, which I think it does, boom! And maybe you didn't even need to create this new layer here. I forgot about that, so you don't even need that. So now I have my original image and I have my layer here. So now I can go and make all the changes I want, and all I have to do is turn this off right here, and you'll have your original image. The reason it's not showing anything different when I click this and unclick it is because I haven't done anything to this layer yet. Whatever layer you're highlighting is the layer that it's actually going to do the changes to. This is also true in Photoshop. Now the next thing it talks about is exposure. So if I click on the exposure thing here, let me go back so you make sure you saw it. Exposure, okay? I get a little slider and I can do all sorts of things. I can make it darker and I can make it brighter. But notice it changes everything. It's moving all the highlights, all the shadows, and all the midtones. It's making them all brighter or all darker, which in some cases you might want to do. In other cases you might not want to do that. So maybe I could just do like 19 or so. And we'll call this layer, you can name them I believe. Okay, and then I'm actually going to go back to this layer and copy it and paste it, and then this. Then you can also change the order of the layers. So I'm going to call this one levels, just so we can kind of get an idea of the control that you can do with each one. Yep. Oh, sorry. Command A, Command C. So you selected everything, copy. Okay, and then hit Command V to paste, just like Microsoft Word or any other app, and you should see it create a new level. You see that? So now you can rename that level, and whatever kind of adjustments you're doing, you could, that way like you can go back and your adjustments are just there. Does that make sense? In Photoshop, you can actually do adjustment layers, which I don't believe this can do. That's where Photoshop starts to get a little bit more powerful. So right now we have, here's what we did. If you're just looking at the exposure layer, which is this one here, notice I unclicked levels, okay? Now you're seeing the original image here because I just copied and pasted. I haven't done anything. So we're going to show you what levels does. Okay, so levels, remember exposure? It changed everything all at once, right? So levels, we look here, you're going to see these little mountain ranges here. Okay, this is called a histogram. What a histogram does is it tells you the density basically of the pixels, like from light to dark. On your left is your shadows, okay? And on your right you have your highlights. Now it's shifted, the mountain range is shifted to the left because the image is underexposed. So if I wanted to keep the highlights here, I didn't want these to get too bright over here. I could adjust it like this just a little bit. But the data starts at this little red line. Can you guys see that? That's where your data starts. So if I push this beyond here, do you see how over in here it starts getting really funky and yellow? That's because I'm pushing the data too far. So that's when I would say, hey, look, you totally clipped all the levels. It's not okay. So I can adjust just the highlights here. Notice it adjusts a little bit of the midtones, but the shadows totally stay the same. Now I can adjust the midtones. Okay, and then I can also adjust the shadows. Now say I wanted the shadows lighter. That's going to be with your output levels down here. But do you see how it starts looking washed out? So you don't want to do that too much. I might want to just, I started at 0. I might just, I don't know, somewhere 92, something like that. Photoshop also has auto levels, which is essentially the first thing that we did when we said auto exposure or whatever that was, auto fix. That's essentially like auto levels. So if I click OK, we can see the difference from our original. So there's our original image. Here's what we did with levels. And here's what we did with exposure. Now, exposure and levels look very similar, but look in the highlights. Look in the whites in the background or in the bottom right. You get basically a little bit more control with levels than you do just exposure. And just so you guys don't have to make all these different layers here, but I'm going to so I can show you the difference between each tool. So I'm going to go to my background again, select all, copy, paste. Now I have a new layer. I'm going to put it on the very top because that's my most current one. And we're going to call this one curves. How are we doing on time, too? Okay, we're doing okay. Now I'm going to turn the other layers off just so I don't accidentally do them. The other thing, I'm looking now at curves because curves is on, but notice I've selected exposure right now. It's a different layer. You have to make sure that the layer you are trying to work on is actually selected in blue. Same thing with Photoshop. You can turn layers on and off, visibility-wise. So you're going to want to make sure that you're looking at that. So if we go back to our adjustment here, and by the way, Photoshop, all these things have shortcuts. Photoshop Command-L is actually levels, and Command-M is curves, so hopefully that helps. And actually, all these are the same shortcuts as Photoshop, from what I can tell so far. Now, curves. This looks like a math problem in some ways. To see where your data is, it's a good idea to click the histogram so you can kind of get an idea of what's happening. So remember in levels, we could adjust 3 things. Does anyone remember what they were? Left to right of the mountain range? Shadows, midtones, and highlights. So blacks, middles, whites. Does that make sense? Now, the difference with curves is we can put a ton of different little points on this little graph and tweak it almost infinitely and make a picture really, really bad if you wanted. Now here's the difference in Photoshop. In Photoshop, if I hold down Option, this cancel button changes to revert, which basically undoes it and resets it. So I'm going to have to actually hit cancel and then Command-M again, and I'll pull it back up. So if I look at my histogram here, shadows on the left, highlights on the right. Highlights are also up here in this edge over here. So if I bring this over, it'll make some changes. And folks, just a little FYI, I want you to know that curves is very powerful. Things that are very powerful are also very complex, and they're usually very hard to learn. So I don't expect anybody to be masters at curves. I just want you to know that it's there and that you can tweak things a little bit. And there's tons of tutorials that get in there. Most people that really do a lot of image editing, they're like, curves, it's the best way, it's the only way. And they're right. I mean, it's really, really powerful. So I could basically change my shadows, because this is your shadows over here. This is your blacks. Here's your midtones. Your gray is right in the middle. Okay. This one down here is called your 3/4 tones. Why? Because if this is 0, this is 1/4, this is half, this is 3/4, this is 1. Does that make sense? So when I say, hey, your 3/4 tones are dark, it's not quite your, it's like the things that are like in this area and here maybe, or in this area here. And so if you watch, if I put a point there, you can kind of see like where it's changing the data. And if you do it too much, it screws it up. So one more time. So basically, you could just do a little thing like this. Maybe brighten it up a little bit. And you can also create contrast by basically making a little bit of an S-curve. So just know that there's a ton of things you can do. Know your 3/4 tones, your quarter tones, and that if you need to make finite adjustments, this is a really good way to do it. Now in Lightroom, you almost never even have to go here. It's way easier, and you still have like even more power than this. So this is traditional Photoshop curves. Enough of that. I should maybe also mention. Oh, well, I guess there's some presets. I just realized. So I can increase the contrast. I can make the image colder since it's a little bit warmer. Let me go back. Let's go back, like say to this level actually. So here's maybe a good reason to use curves. See how this image looks a little bit too warm? You guys know what I mean by warm? Like a little bit yellow versus cold. So you have some presets here. Where'd they go? So I go colder. So you see it actually, what it did is you'll see that it changed different channels. And what I mean by channels is that your image is actually made up of red, green, and blue. So you can adjust the color in here. And this is where curves gets really powerful, is because you can do this with each color band. Now in levels, you can also change each color, and that's a good way to do some simple corrections. I'm just trying to make sure that I have enough time to kind of give you a large overview of what's possible. And this is going to be recorded, so it'll work. And then we'll go back in, and we can add a little bit more, and you guys will get better and better each week. So you should be feeling overwhelmed right now. That's kind of the norm. There's a million different ways to do this stuff. And anyway. Okay, so, and one of the ways to learn, like, what can this thing do? Like, hey, that's invert. That's what a slide would look like. Actually, a color negative. So let's go to default. Colder. Warmer. So if you have a cold image, because it was shot on a cloudy day and you wanted to give it a little bit of a tan, that you could hit warmer. You could do increased contrast. Do you see how it made this S-curve? Now I can bring up the middle tones or darken, if you play around with that. I can reduce the contrast. I can darken the shadows, chill, auto, and apparently, look, there's like, this is basically your Instagram. I'm actually learning some of these little details as I go, because I do my stuff in Photoshop or Lightroom. I don't do this day in, day out. So there's lots of presets that are basically in here that you can do. All right. Levels, curves, hue and saturation. So hue and saturation, adjustment, hue and saturation. So hue is, what kind of color is it? Hue is basically like, what variation of the color do we have? Okay, saturation, and these are my, off the top of my head, definitions here. Saturation, does anyone know what saturation does? So an image that's oversaturated looks like, yeah, see how we get like these really weird tones in her face, and it's not natural. But you can usually add a little bit. And in Photoshop, there's also something called vibrance, and vibrance is a variation on saturation. And what it does is it allows you to increase those things, but without tweaking the colors and the skin tones. It doesn't make them really, really weird. So it's like saturation light, kind of. It's a really good way to make some adjustments. Now, what's an image that's black and white? If saturation is full of color, black and white is desaturated. So, hey, look, it's a black and white image. Or if you want the 70s look, hey, look, the image is 40 years old and the color faded. What do you know? It's less saturated. Now, lightness, this is, I don't know what you use lightness for in this. I think it's, I don't know. As a photojournalist, you're probably not going to use lightness very often. So that's a little overview on saturation. Usually, like, if you just bump it up a little bit, especially if this was a landscape kind of picture, you can do that. The cool thing when you go into Lightroom, it's really easy. You could, like, say this was a sky back here. You could basically click on it once and say, this is the color of the sky, and then increase the saturation only in the blues in the sky in like 2 clicks. In here, you have to do a whole lot of things. I'll try to get it, but like you would have to select it in an area, then you have to feather it, and then you have to tweak your selection, and then you change it. Anyway, you're going to need to get to know these little tools here. Let me go back to select all. So here's this image, and this is like one of the super easy basic things that I look for when did you edit your image or not. The first thing I really look for is did you crop it. So someone here point out what should be cropped out of this image. Let me get a pointer for you. Is that working for you? You lost. So you have an image. Okay. So go to view. Layers. And you don't have to do that. That's just so you can go back, basically, like an undo at any point versus an undo only. So who wants to tell me what they should crop? All right, the middle button here, mine that. You'd be mad that I took this toy, but so you crop that out. Now, why would you crop that out? So that's not part of your subject, right? But it's in there. What else would be cropped? This is about like her throwing the pitch, his girlfriend or boyfriend, sorry, different family member, a birthday party. And we needed to have a picture of how she did this surprise birthday party. It was not surprise, but okay, why?
Your eye kind of goes to that corner.
Why do you think it goes to the corner? Okay. I would argue maybe one of the reasons why your eye goes there is because this is probably one of the brighter parts of the image. So your eye, when you do eye tracking research, which is like when you look at something, they've done research where they like see where does your eye go first. Eye always pretty much goes to the brightest spot in the image, and I believe the second spot where they go to is there a human in there? Us as humans, we're designed to like recognize other humans or shapes of humans. So that kind of, or faces. So that's kind of how that works. So we're going to crop this image. Thank you very much. Are you good to go now? A little bit? Okay. So we're going to crop, and I will try to find a handout. There was actually an awesome reading that I read the other day about cropping, and I will put that in there for the assignment. It basically talked about like starting from the inside and adding, and basically you stop when it doesn't make any more sense to add, or sometimes you have to re-crop it because there's a layout that you need to match, and so therefore you would include extra elements. It's a great handout. So anyway, we're going to go to our cropping tool here. That's this thing here that looks like little L's, and I think there's a shortcut. If I hit the letter C, you notice how my cursor changed? So you're going to want to get to know these little shortcuts. And if you hover over it, notice that it tells you what they are. It tells you the name of it, and it tells you the shortcut. Remember those, and I will try to find a handout on the shortcuts, because that way you don't waste all your time clicking back and forth with tools. You can have one hand on the keyboard and your other hand on the mouse and never have to like move your hands and lift up. So we're going to crop this image. Okay, now what are these lines and these grids up here? Anyone? The rule of thirds. This is an option in Photoshop that's pretty sweet that it automatically gives you the rule of thirds. So where should I line this up? Someone tell me. I'm gonna have it like, let me start out over here, or does someone just want to come up and do it? I want to be like kind of interactive here. So we decided we wanted to crop out the bottom, right? So where do I stop? I'm just gonna keep going until someone says something. Okay, you gotta speak up.
No, I'm actually confident.
Why?
We don't need the second head, just we'll do the first one.
Okay, now I'm gonna start going left from the far right. You guys tell me when to stop.
Stop.
Why?
You as much of the other heads on the picture, but you're not getting
Well, the nice thing is you lined the most important element, her face, pretty much dead center on the rule of thirds, which is what you want to do. Okay, now we need to deal with the left side of the picture. So we need to crop out this thing here. Where do we stop? Somewhere in here. Why not here? Yeah, it adds something. And I actually might even go here, because right here I get this little edge of I get the corner, so I might actually crop it right here. Now you'll see that our rule of thirds is off now, because it changed. So now we got to go back over here. Okay. Now the problem is, who here works on the publication and it does some design work? Anyone? Laura, right? Laura, what's the problem with this picture right now? Yeah, it's too square. What's her name again? Grace, that's right. So one of the problems might be, and that's not necessarily a problem, but this is square, and maybe the layout calls for a more horizontal picture. So we might have to stretch this back out and do this, even though it's not exactly what we want ideally, but that's what the designer needs. So when you're giving a picture to somebody, what you could do is, I double-clicked it. I could save it at this point. Okay? Then I could save it again, but as a different file, and I could give them both. Here's the crop I think you should run, but in case that screws you up, I don't want you to call me in the middle of the night to ask for the original. So here's that. Now you guys laugh. When I worked at the Birmingham Post-Herald, it was an afternoon paper. So they go to press at like 9 or 10 in the morning. Well, in order to do that, editors are coming in at like 3 or 4 in the morning. You definitely don't want to get a call if you have a misspelled name or anything. So we would actually write in there, there's something called CQ. I don't know actually the history behind that, but you would put someone's name and then you would put in parentheses CQ, which means like, I double check that that's how you spell this name. And if it was really, really weird, we'd like even write on there, I know this doesn't look right, but this is how it really is. This is not a typo. Anyway, so that's actually a pretty good crop. And if we want to go back now, unfortunately, all of these here, it's cropped, right? Or is it not? Yeah, it's cropped. So we can't actually go back unless we went all the way over here with our history. We could go back to when we changed the exposure. I don't know if that was the first thing that we did or not. I think it might have been. I don't know. Sometimes there's different levels of undo. You can only go back 10 levels or 20 levels or whatever. In Photoshop, I think you can set it. It's dependent on your memory. This is a huge, huge advantage to using Photoshop Lightroom because Lightroom doesn't actually change the pixels. It just says, when you're going to export this, use this crop. So at any given point, if I was here, or even, let's go back to the crop tool. Where was our square crop? It was something like that, more or less, kind of, sort of. It says, do you want to apply the changes? I click yes, which actually I don't really like that crop. But so at this point, I could basically, when I click back on the cropping tool in Lightroom, all the rest of the image pulls up, and you can retweak it at any given time. So it's awesome. But it's $80. So it's kind of up to you. All right, so cropping, any questions? Let's see. So we've cropped it. Now, dodge and burn. We've got 8 minutes.
How did you get
two,
separate into sections when you cropped it.
when I did like that.
Yes.
So you first click. Let me go back here. So when I click, hold on, escape. So say I had a selection or whatever, I don't know, and then I click on the crop tool, it doesn't do anything. But when I click and draw, so I click, then I take my mouse over, and then I release, then I get that. Same thing in Photoshop for the most part. It looks slightly different. So I'm going to crop it. Oops, I don't like that brown on there though. We're going to take that out. So I've got my rule of thirds. Now, I don't mind like the levels of the background in here, but I could probably, like, it's about her, right? So if we want to influence the viewer to see her first, and the eye goes to the lightest part of the image, what could we do to this image? Anyone? Brighten her face. Well, how do we? I can't use levels because that's going to change everything. I can't use all the tools I've shown you so far. That's going to change everything. So what you'd use is dodge and burn. This comes from the old days in the darkroom where there was literally an enlarger with a lamp or a light bulb in there. There was your negative and there was a lens that focused that light onto a photosensitive piece of paper. And you would manipulate that light coming through by literally like taking a pen and a piece of cardboard with taped onto it, and you would do this. And you would not let certain areas get exposed as much. And you would keep it moving because your exposure might be 15 seconds, 30 seconds onto the paper from the enlarger. And then if you wanted to make an area darker, you could cup your hands and make a hole, or you would have a piece of paper with a hole in it, and you would selectively make areas darker. So that is why we see a hand that's cupped, and we see a stick with a little thingy on it, a round thing. So click on your dodge tool here. This is called dodge, okay, and that's the shortcut is O. We're going to use our brush size, which is how big is this going to be. And some of that is going to be dependent on how much your resolution is. So this is a pretty big resolution still. We're at 2,000 pixels. So let's make this a little bit bigger. Now hardness, if you notice here, so this is a very hard edge. So that's going to be, I believe, 100. Okay, so that's a very hard edge. And then if you want a soft brush, you can adjust that there. So so that's a really soft brush, which means it's feathered. So it doesn't just interact with one area or another. It kind of does less and less and less as it expands out. Does that make sense? Okay. There's probably some cool stuff in more or whatever, but so I've selected the brush that I want. It's kind of the size of her face. Once you click on dodge or burn, and this, by the way, is for doing saturation, the sponge tool. It has all the same tools. Did you find dodge? Is everybody here dodge? And then the brush tools are over here. In Photoshop, I believe they're not. They might be here, or they might be over in here. Question? Okay. Now, what do we want to dodge? We want to dodge the shadows, the highlights, or the midtones. Probably the midtones and the highlights. Okay. And what we're doing here is we're adding lightness here, which is making the face have more contrast and making it brighter. Now, if I do 50%, let's see what it looks like. That's not too bad. Now, if this was in Photoshop and you did 50%, it would look probably see how it's not actually doing anything? Funny that. Hey, look, I'm viewing this one here, but I'm editing this one here. So let's look and see what we did. Okay, so let's undo. Now, folks, this happened to the professor, so this will happen to you too, and there's no big deal. You just go back. And actually, I don't really like this curves level. Let's just work on this exposure one, because I think this is kind of a better exposure. So if it's at 100, you can see it makes a lot of change really, really fast. Okay, that's a little too much. If you're using Photoshop, I suggest using it around 10 to 12%, 8 to 12%, something like that. And just do a little at a time. It looks like Pixlr is not as sensitive. But you see how I can just add a little bit of lightness to her face and how that really enhances that picture. Maybe I could do, let's change this to 30, maybe just a little bit here so it kind of matches. a little bit. And that would be pretty good. Now this picture still looks yellow a little bit to me, and how I know that is really looking at something that's white. So now that we have an extra 3 minutes, woohoo, I clicked over on your levels. I'm going to show you how to change the levels on individual channels. Does anybody know what the opposite color of blue is? Yellow. So if I want to change the yellows, I'm going to go to my blue channel, and I'm going to play with this highlight slider, because what I'm trying to do is get this area to be white. Get the creamy yellows kind of, I don't want them totally white, but you'll see as I change this, do you see how they come white? So this is a really easy way to change color. Now if I go too far, it turns more blue, but this is a good way to kind of just make some subtle little changes in there. There are other ways to do that. In other editors, you'll see it'll say color temperature. You can do that. And I believe you might even be able to do that with, let's see, color balance. What does that do? I don't know. But see, this is changing it across the whole image, versus the levels was only changing it at the highlight part of it. Which sometimes you want to do one, sometimes you want to do the other. What I was trying to see, where's curves? Control M. Let me see, if I click here and then here, to see it's a little bit too much, unfortunately, but you can usually kind of click on a white point. There's some ways you can set it up where you just like one click on something white and everything looks good. There's also one other tool that's in here called brightness and contrast. This just gives you like rudimentary abilities to change those things. So that's a short summary of what you can do with Pixlr. Almost all of these tools are also in like Aviary. There's another thing right within everything except for the dodge and burn is in Aviary, I believe. Aviary is an online image editor as well that's really easy to access with one click from within Pixlr. Really powerful editor. I will be tweaking your assignment and getting it up probably by late tonight, so check for tomorrow morning. Basically, you need to find an image and you need to make the adjustments that are on there, and then you need to write up, this is what I did, and more important is why you did it. So try to find like an old picture or something like that. What we didn't cover, by the way, is the clone tool. And where is it? This one here is basically like to take out a zit or whatever. And this one here does some similar things, but if you zoom in really close, you'll see that it doesn't. You lose a lot of the details in the image. So typically, you're going to want to use this clone stamping tool. If you're using Pixlr. If you use Photoshop, the tools are a little bit better. Lightroom, the tools are awesome as well. But that's how you clone little things out, like, I don't know, maybe there was a nail in the wall right here, right? Or there was a nail like right here above your boss's head and you're the head of PR. Like, you're going to clone that out, right? So that's what you'd use the clone tool for. We can get into more little details and how to do different things. You will also need to know how to change it to black and white, and I believe you can do image, where is it? Desaturate, black and white. You will need to make a black and white version of it, and notice that this doesn't look quite the same anymore, because a lot of that contrast that we saw in there was actually contrast of colors, not necessarily just of lightness values. So you need to go in and change this some more. So you're going to have your original in your set, you're going to have your color image in there, and you're going to have your black and white image. I'm also going to ask you to crop it to a certain size, and since we didn't cover that, I will likely have a little handout that says this is exactly what I want you to do. If you get stuck, do the absolute best that you can. Email a friend, email me. Show that you've really tried and do the best you can. To get these out of here, you're going to do File, Save. Okay. Now, if this is an edit and you pulled it in from Flickr, you're going to want to save it as something else, not as your original. Does that make sense? Kind of one of the best things to do is to do a save as right from the get-go. You're going to want to save it as a JPEG because that's the compressed format. Now, when you do a JPEG, it's going to get rid of all these layers. If you want to keep your amazing, awesome picture with layers, then you need to do this PXD, which is similar to a PSD, which is Photoshop document. So just know JPEG and 80%, whatever, that's fine. Click Save, put it on your desktop, then upload that in, and you're good to go. All right, class, thank you very much. Thanks for your patience. I know it's not always easy. If you're stressed about it and it's really confusing, that's pretty much where you should be. So that's normal, and it'll get much better.